You know the story. 22 years earlier, the 10 brothers sold Yosef into slavery. And now, after all of that time, the brothers appear before the viceroy of Egypt, also known as Yosef, and are accused of espionage, miraglimatem. But they weren't spies. They were just the sons of Yaakov seeking to survive a famine by buying grain from Egypt. Nevertheless, their brother, who had now risen to this powerful position and who they did not recognize, saw this as an opportunity to fulfill the dreams and insisted that they all remain in Egypt, sending back just one brother to retrieve Binyamin. Shilchu mikem echad, v'yikach et achechem. And then he threw them all into jail for 3 days. But just as suddenly, he brought them out, telling them, Zot asu v'chyu, this is what you need to do to live. And he told them that he had changed his mind because at Elokim ani yarem, he was in awe of God. And so instead of keeping 9 brothers in prison and releasing just one, he proposed imprisoning just one and let the other 9 go home with provisions and ultimately bring back their younger brother, at which time, ve'amnu divrechem, your story will be believed, and the imprisoned brother will be released. Vayasu chen, and they did it, said the Torah. But what did they do? Weren't they still standing before Yosef? So they didn't go home. And no one was chosen to stay behind, so they didn't fulfill his offer. So what did they do? According to Rabbeinu B'chaim, what they did was to volunteer, each one of them at the very same time, to be the one left behind. Kach misha tirtzeh, choose whichever one of us you want. And yet, if that's the case, if they all stepped up, why doesn't it say so? But even more, why does the very next pasuk report that what they did talk about had nothing to do with volunteering to stay, but had everything to do with their newfound sense of guilt for selling Yosef? Aval hashemim anachnu. What really happened after Yosef called them back with an entirely new proposal? Rav Shimon Schwab Zatzal in his Ma'ayan Beit HaShoevam offers a fascinating explanation. He writes that for 3 days, the brothers sat in jail terrified, not knowing what would happen to them, but also fearing that their families would starve to death, never to receive the provisions that they had set out to bring back. But then, unexpectedly, they were brought once again before the mighty Mishneh Lamelech, the viceroy. And unlike anything they expected, this all-powerful ruler announced that he had changed his mind. He showed them mercy, was willing to let them go, risk never seeing them again, and was prepared to send them off with all of the provisions they desired. It was then, Vaya'asu chen, that they did precisely the same thing. They realized that if the viceroy could reconsider his actions, so should they. Vaya'asu chen. They looked deep inside themselves and realized that the time had come to revisit their actions of 22 years earlier. And when they did, they realized that as sure as they were when they sold their brother into slavery, now after all of these years, after all of the suffering they caused their father, that they were wrong. Aval Hashemim anachnu. And that's how the story went. From Yosef changing his mind to the brothers changing theirs, reconsidering and ultimately beginning the process of tshuva and reunification, which was a lesson they learned, but also one we should learn, because we live in an era where so many are so sure of everything and unsure about next to nothing. And as a result, we are a nation divided like never before. We put ourselves into nice, neat little boxes, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, dati or charedi, Tzioni or non-Tzioni. Boxes that are impermeable, impenetrable, and invincible, at least in our own imaginations. But when we do, when we're unwilling to even consider the other side of an issue, reconsider our stance, or revisit our position, so often we find ourselves at odds with others instead of working together to make things better. That's what happened to the 10 brothers. That's what happened when they took harsh action that they thought was necessary, and for 22 years were unwilling to reconsider their actions until a great and powerful person, the viceroy of Egypt, paved the way. And it was then that they saw that it's possible to reconsider. And so they did. Vayasu chen. They took a second look and saw the error of their ways. And by doing so, they rose in greatness. As Churchill once said, all men make mistakes, but only wise men learn from their mistakes. And with it began the process which led the brothers to coming together, the brothers to saving one another, and the brothers ultimately to create the Jewish nation. Shabbat Shalom.